Today I'm going to talk a little bit about texture and lost and found images, or edges, I'm sorry, lost and found edges. I have this wonderful picture. I'm a little biased because I took it myself. It's of goldfish or maybe carp, and also called koi, I believe, at the Japanese gardens at the Chicago Botanic Gardens. I could just stand and watch them all day long, and I just love the play of the cool, which would be the blues and greens colors, against the warm colors of the fish. Also, just the interesting texture and play of the fish being partially submerged in water. And so it's a challenge to do that, but I love the image so much I was committed to figuring out how that could be done. So there are a couple of ways. One is to create a surface that has texture so that the artist doesn't get too literal about showing these shapes and so forth, and can kind of find the fish within the texture. And one way to do that is to create a textured surface. I did that here. You can see this is a piece of off-cut foam core. I seem to have all of these little pieces left from cutting larger pieces, and on this is a substance that is a textured liquid texture. Now you can buy this, I forget what it's called, but people who paint in acrylics often use it, or watercolor. It goes on wet and then it dries and leaves this raised textured surface. I discovered that I could make my own. I happen to have some gesso that I'm trying to get rid of. Got for some project and I don't need it anymore. Gesso is basically white paint. So if you have white paint, that would work. Acrylic, water-based paint, mixed with talcum powder or talc. So you need to get a product that has talc in it. Many powders today don't have talc because they have some unhealthy qualities, but this brand does. You can tell by reading the ingredients on the back. And a glue, a liquid glue. Now this is Mr. Stiffy, which is made, I think by the same company that makes Mod Podge, but Mod Podge would work as well. And so it's 1 part powder, 1 part paint, and 1 part liquid glue, like Mr. Stiffy. Anyway, and then you spread it on the surface, and it takes a little while to dry because you want it to be hard. And then when you put a piece of paper over it, and I use the side of the pencil, I got these random interesting textures that I would not be able to sort of make up in my rational mind, and I don't want them to be rational, so that works very well. I started with a very light. I could actually have used a lighter pencil or even a lighter touch, because what I wanted was this random pattern here that I could then go in and begin to darken. So I went in with, I went in with a lightish green, a very bluish green, and then went in on some of these ridges here to darken them. And then I went in with an orange to find a fish. Now, it helps to know the structure of a fish. You don't have to take any tests on it or anything, but a fish has a bone structure that goes up like this. You can see here. And so that part is going to be out of the water, and it's hard because it's bony, so it's going to stick up out of the water. So when you look down on these koi, the light is going to hit that top bone structure and be the lightest part, which is what gives the fish its shape, in addition, of course, to its side shape, which is fairly simple. But that light hitting that top is what really makes these, look here, you can really see that the top of the fish is out of water. So where the head and the tail go down into the water, it's going to be, the edges are going to be very indistinct and perhaps a little bit darker. So when I did this texture, oops, let's get the picture out here. Then I went in and sort of found the fish, so to speak, and going over it lightly, over these blue shapes. It's almost like finding the fish in the water. So I'm keeping the edges very indistinct. And on the top there, oh, I don't have my yellow here, so I'm just going to leave it white to show that that top is sticking out. And then I went in with my darker colors to kind of soften those edges. And it helped me to just think of, I'm just pouring water over this fish so that these edges sort of disappear. And this is sort of green, murky, almost swamp water. So I want a little bit of green in there as well. And to get the darker parts, it's good to remember that complementary colors are what will neutralize color and make it darker. So I'm using greens here, then I'll want to go in. This plum color works very well. It has some red in it, but it also has some blue in it. But it begins to darken that water. What I want is the water area. And even some pinkish color livens up certain areas where you want them. Then I go back with the green over that plum, and I can get a pretty dark, intense. This is hard for me to do while I'm talking because I found this process very meditative, just sort of at random getting these darks and lights and not thinking about it too much and stopping and looking back and seeing if the fish was appearing and disappearing. So that's one way, that would be one way to approach this project. Another way would be to start with getting the shape of the fish. So start this with the orange. So looking at that little fish right there, and he's really kind of submerged. He has an eye structure. It's not a very complicated shape, but there are some bony points. So the eyes stick out like that, and then the body comes around, a familiar fish shape that we've all probably drawn as children. Then the tails, if the fish is moving, the tail is going to be moved over to the side like that. So again, just getting a little bit of tone down there to color it in, and then I'm going to color it over, as I said, cover it with water. And I'm noticing that the top, or right along this top edge here, is very sharp, and then where the fish rolls, the side of the fish rolls over, it's much more indistinct and what I would call softer. So I'm going to keep that edge, and I'm starting with the green because that water really is primarily a greenish color. And then on the top, just along there, I'm going to make it pretty sharp, and that will give it its effect of rolling out of the water. And again, I would layer these colors to eventually get, that's quite dark and not much texture in there. So I'd want to keep that pretty smooth. And then to get the places where the fish are really splashing and you see the light playing off the water and the fish themselves are lighter, that one's either higher up, closer to the surface of the water, or it's just a lighter fish. I lightened up as I went along here and did a little bit more detail in parts of the fish. So that would be one way. The third way would be to simply really enjoy these unique shapes and textures and not even worry about having images that are recognizable from nature. It could be simply an exercise in abstract texture, light, dark, lost and found edges, and that could be very fun too.